Greetings, everybody, for August 21st, the second to last week of August 2025. This is when I am filming. The Texas State House has just passed its maps because of caving, what seems like caving, which is a sad end to the saga that I never really got to chronicle on this channel of Texas Democrats going out of state, denying quorum, which exists at the state level. Quorum is something that's designed to prevent coups. It requires a certain number of people to be present in order to pass anything. But and I don't believe we have it at the federal level, but the Texas state constitution includes it. That's a big story. I'm going to get to it later. There are still paths. There are still ways that we can defeat this, and I'm going to go over all the implications of this in a separate video, a fireside, which I might also be filming tonight. Don't be surprised if these come out a little bit later. But for now, I am going to finish, at long last, the final chapter, Chapter 5, of my paper. This is a paper that I have been waiting to finish and waiting to read to y'all since March of this year. And it is the name of the paper is Mass Child Maltreatment and the Future of Industrial Democracy. And this is a paper that I did actually. It was originally an undergraduate paper, but I've made it open access via the channel and via the links that I provide. And it is an understanding of how we got here, focusing on the history of the American family over the past 60 years, and which is the main explanation that I can think of, because we've been able to survive many other problems, but this is the one that is most threatening to us. This is the time we're most threatened, and there is a track record in other countries of crises like what we've been going through with the American family, and problems like the opioid crisis that have come out of it. There is a history of these kinds of problems overwhelming societies and causing the kinds of destruction that we're seeing now, and if we're not careful, it could get much worse with the technology that we have, hence the name Mass Child Maltreatment in the History of Industrial Democracy, the Future of Industrial Democracy. So, without further ado, I will be starting Chapter 5, which is titled, Where Are We Now, and What Can We Do About It? Chapter 5. Where are we now? What can we do about it? So where are we now? It is not an exaggeration to say that democracy and the industrial world have never been in as much peril as they are now. Over the past 10 years, democracy in the United States, the world's strongest military power, has been in peril from the far-right forces known as the MAGA movement. Limited reforms were made in the period following 2021 after the COVID experience and January 6th, which may prevent or allow for the reversal of democratic collapse. By the way, I wrote this paper in stages, and much of it was written before the 2024 election. So pardon the funny language. These reforms had taken effect throughout the 4 years since the 2020 election. However, in spite of them, they were not enough. Donald Trump won the presidency in 2024, illegitimately, I might add. He was not allowed to run under the 14th Amendment, bringing back his string of constitutional crises and his vows to trample the environment. The environmental movement has succeeded more than before in the period after 2020, but a vigorous focus on both environmental triage and decarbonization is necessary. The allies of these permanent interests, which are essential to any recovery, must engage in a resistance to the policies of the self-proclaimed Trump administration. It still said coming in the original text. I have to change that. This resistance must be international in nature because of the instability of the United States. It must be motivated by a positive vision of the future. This is what I talk about when I talk about people don't want to live. They don't want to make it into years like 2040 or 2050 because they can't imagine that they would have lives worth living at that time. It must be motivated by a positive vision of the future. It must be rooted in local organizations, which are most difficult to corrupt, as well as new ones. And it will have to be a big tent that includes ideological groups, which have many of the flaws outlined in this paper and helped get us to this moment. The temptation, even among people who are part of this movement, is to self-censor in the name of preserving a coalition. But we ought to remember what is valuable about liberal democracy. It is the right to challenge leaders and disagree with each other, and the right to argue truth to power. I am sure that the people in such a resistance movement and people all over the world would be willing in this desperate moment to self-reflect and consider how we got here, in order to rob these dangerous forces of the source of their power. We must not throw this ability away, lest we become the very mindless conformist monster we oppose, and, as the truth always gets its revenge in the end, sabotage our ability to rebuild industrial democracy. We must learn from our errors last time. As hard as it is, there is no more time left. The need for an honest portrayal of recent history. With that in mind, we must begin to develop a comprehensive history of the past 60 years. Based on the material discussed in this paper, much of our recent history is cemented in the state of familial relationships, given the responsibility they bear for the state of the world today. A history which breaks the power of all big lies must be formed through fact-finding activities such as truth commissions and retroactive research, which we'll discuss further below. This history must be taught throughout the education system in an age-appropriate way, in order to make the historical lessons abundantly clear to the coming generations, so they do not make the same mistakes with their own children. The need for honest sex education. The main debate, as discussed above, on the issue of sex education is a debate between an abstinence-only approach and an approach which is supposedly comprehensive. This was, as discussed above, a quagmire for the social conservative movement, a useless policy. Instead, the contents of this paper show the path to a new form of sex education, which includes not just anatomy and medicine, but primarily an inclusive of history, anecdotal stories, sociological statistics, and the law. This would include, in the case of anecdotal stories, this would include speakers and assemblies and things like that, which we have for drugs. This is not hard. It's just something that we've chosen not to do. We've willfully ignored it. The need for transitional justice and retroactive fact-finding. The past 40 years, as outlined above, includes a great deal of inconvenient history and data. It is not a waste of money to find and recalculate economic data, for instance, which was doctored, as has been done with a lot of the adjustments to inflation statistics, for instance, all the way back to the 90s. This was something that happened after the 94 Republican Revolution. That's not included in the paper, by the way. Nor is it a waste of money to calculate social statistics related to generations or to the past. These numbers will be helpful in forming a consensus history which can be taught in schools and serve as a source of political narrative for reformers to draw upon. Transitional justice efforts must acknowledge the lasting impact of injustices such as the decline of family cohesion or older ones, such as racial discrimination and nativism, rather than just the upcoming administration, which will, sadly, generate a tremendous amount of tragic material. The need for incentives to promote the peace of families. The Health and Human Services proposals of Project 2025, which we've been forced to confront, are extreme and dangerous. This must be squared with the fact that an approach with no preventative policies for the pathology described in this paper, which is the approach we currently have, is unworkable in the long term and has led us to our current state. Instead, there are concepts such as Pigovian taxes, which are useful. The goal of a Pigovian tax, as described, is to internalize to the consumer, which can be interpreted in a number of different contexts, an injustice by imposing the costs of that behavior or product on the individual. There are a number of sexualized products that, under the Miller test and future jurisprudence, could be taxed in such a way under the First Amendment. These are not political speech, obviously. And I will add to that we can do this as part of a broader public health system that we can create. We can also include physical health care and things like high-fat food. And we can also include social media as well. There are a number of different ways that we could fit this together into and get this passed legislatively in a way that involves compromise. There should be a greater effort to preserve marriages when they're salvageable, while still bringing the abusive ones to swift and just conclusions. This could be achieved, for instance, through tax credits for couples therapy, or taxes on assets in no-fault divorces, which could be implemented progressively for richer couples, who tend to set an example. The latter in particular is risky because of the need for battered spouses and children to leave a violent marriage as quickly as possible, which is one of the reasons for applying progressive taxation that is relatively unimpactful on the poor. For instance, the ability to file for a no-fault divorce, to speed up the separation process, then to regain custody of your children, if they so choose as outlined below, and pursue damages could alleviate the pernicious effects of disincentives to divorce on people who are in abusive relationships. Judicial reforms would be needed to ensure that all of these processes could work smoothly. The usefulness of collected taxes in restorative programs. One of the core ideas of a Pigovian tax is that the proceeds of the tax are distributed to government programs which help remedy the harms of what is taxed. The proceeds of this tax, taxes on things that harm mental health, could include many of the underfunded social programs described in this paper. Such a policy has been implemented so far for the tobacco tax in several states, and for Massachusetts speeding tickets, whose proceeds go to the Head Injury Treatment Services Trust Fund. The tax on tobacco, in particular, has been studied as a model for potential Pigovian taxes and on alcohol and carbon emissions, as seen in Part 4. Smoking rates have dropped substantially during the effect of this law. The need to use kinship care to protect the dignity and safety of kids in divorce. Approximately 22 million households have experienced parental alienation as part of a divorce or separation process, given the average birth rate of 1.6, which, with disadvantages of class and race, is likely an understatement. These 22 million households would mean about 35 million people in the United States, larger than the population of Texas, which currently have living parents because of the study design, have experienced parental alienation. Traditional reform projects, such as those implemented in Israel, of which I'm generally proud, by the way, and I think they will remove their dictator very soon. They are a strong people. They don't take crap. And I really think that he's going to go bye-bye. But anyway, rely on changing the court process itself. Traditional reform projects rely on changing the court process itself. However, these come with trade-offs, such as making the determination of abuse in these households requires a discovery period, which inevitably takes time. In my view, a better solution would be to suspend parental custody of children whenever possible during a period of divorce. For families in which there are no suitable guardians capable of kinship care, this process can be waived. Obviously, we don't want to put people into the foster system unnecessarily. This process can be waived and the parents can decide, sorry, I have a life, custody agreements in the existing process. In the new standard, though, custody is not part of the divorce process at all. Instead, the children would have psychological counseling as well as legal counsel, and would be allowed, while living in kinship care, to come to their own decision, such as whether to live with their existing guardian indefinitely, to live with one of their parents, or potentially a shared custody agreement if they choose. While many, including NCCPR, would object to these removals at the beginning of the process, they would be standardized and predictable, as opposed to the current system, in which kids are removed on an unpredictable basis, often multiple times. Residential instability is known to be toxic to children in the research literature. Children would no longer be subject to the dubious and arbitrary authority of parents who were often incapable of keeping them in mind when they made the decisions, possibly including choosing that person in the first place, which led to the divorce. Again, why should they be subject to the authority of their parents, which is often so arbitrary? If they loved them so much, there's a lot of things that they could have done. But the children can choose, and they should choose in this system. The need to reform DCFs to exercise due process of law and be held to the standards of real police. As mentioned in previous chapters, DCF has a great deal of power alongside a broken series of priorities. They will focus on the indicators of poverty instead of the deeper problems that are more relevant to healthy development, indicators such as clutter, for instance, instead of the deeper problems that are more relevant to healthy development. And their interventions will be clumsy, overpowered, and late. DCFs and CPSs will need to be held accountable, for instance, by having their cases published or being answerable to the Inspector General through similar processes as the police. And their criteria must be brought in line with the overwhelming evidence that wealth matters little to child development compared to intangibles. The urgent need to simultaneously heal our deeply wounded institutions, economy, and environment. The damage we have done to the economy, environment, and institutions will not heal itself. This is the lesson of the 2024 election, frankly, one that I did not need, because I already understood it. And there's a lot of bittersweet things about that. Back on track. We will need a number of institutional reforms, such as constitutional amendments, to restore a trustworthy government. Reforms to restrict the powers of the pardon against use within an administration or to political appointees, to require qualifications for the Supreme Court, to render ballot initiatives easier and less reversible by the legislature, to reform our first-past-the-post system so that declining parties can be peacefully replaced with new political parties, rather than ever creating a period of gridlock that could lead to such carnage again. To render presidents open to being prosecuted, even sitting presidents, in certain cases, and undoing institutional attacks such as Schedule F and presidential immunity, among many more. We will need economic reforms to reconstruct a healthy economy, such as a land value tax and subdivision reform in the United States, in order to allow infill housing to stabilize the market and manage the necessary decline in prices gently. We will need to actually enforce our antitrust laws. We will need to make a commitment to honest statistics. We will need to rethink our transportation systems to improve efficiency through de-emphasizing single-occupant auto travel as the primary means of transportation. We will need to create a circular economy, in short. The environmental situation will not allow us to wait. We need to continue the long-delayed energy transition we have finally begun and have geoengineering programs in place for the areas where it would already be too late without them, such as Thwaites Glacier in the Amazon rainforest. In the longer term, seawalls, cloud seeding programs, stratospheric aerosol injection, and other ways of adapting to the CO2 concentrations we have created will be necessary to create a prosperous 1.5 or so degree world, which is numerically impossible at this point on the merits of just our emissions mitigation. Beyond any of these individual suggestions emerges a pattern of a strong, vigorous government that is capable of organizing at scale for the common good. We have had this before, and we need it again. We will need to do this ourselves, and therefore recover and become healthy enough to do this. We cannot simply wait for our children to do it for us instantly, even if we were to instantly stop the carnage in all of the homes in America and in all of the homes in America and European countries tonight. This is what it will take to endure the peril we are currently in, and to do our best to never end up here again. That was a doozy. And there's a lot of things that I need to hear about that. Sometimes it's hard for me to believe that it's even possible to do these things. It's never been done before in the physical, geological history of Earth. It's entirely untested. But I suppose we have to have faith, which is so hard for me after this election. I'll try to get to you soon with the day-to-day news, but this was very important. This is my last one on mass child maltreatment and the future of industrial democracy. I have the playlist in the description so that you can watch the rest of them if you're just joining now. And I will try to get to the news of the moment because it's scary, but I still believe that we're in a better position right now than we have been right now and definitely over the course of the past 3 months. Even with the times that it's looked like they were pulling ahead, it's never actually ultimately happened yet. And I truly believe that we have more opportunities to stop this than we ever have before, which is not how it normally works with this kind of autocratic breakthrough. So I will be getting you the news, and God bless you all. I love you, and I'll be seeing you again soon. Take care, everybody.